Greetings. This mini lecture is going to give a brief introduction for one way to read literature and looking at literary analysis and criticism. Well, we're going to start with this thing called a text, a scratch outline. And it's not much more than what it sounds, except for it just has you ask yourself questions in a systematic way. The document that I have on the screen, you can download and read through it on your own. And it also has a example format for how you might want to take notes. You should know that you can use this document in however way you want. The questions are probably the most important part as you get material so that you can start to come up with ideas for how you might discuss what we're reading in a variety of ways. So first of all, the Scratch Outline is an informal way to engage in literary criticism and begin thinking about critical analysis. Our introduction to more formal approaches to literary criticism and analysis will come from Foster's text, the chapters that you're reading there, and also these videos by a teacher called Tim Nance. So what I want to show you as I go through this document here is basically you use a Scratch Outline to look at a text section by section and write material that will help you think critically. Think like a second grader. And if you haven't checked out the mini lesson on second graders, you might want to do that. It's in the glossary. It's a mini lesson, think 01. But have us think like a second grader, ask all kinds of great, interesting questions, but in such a way that we can talk about them. We can have discussions like inquisitive adults. The kinds of questions you ask yourself on a Scratch Outline about fiction might be different from what you're used to. You are going to go beyond just summarizing what the text is about or its meaning. You are going to go beyond just the what is this about? You're going to go to how and why and look at the text as a part of our larger social world, because fiction is stories about people and people live in the world. And so we're going to look at them for how these texts tell us about different sorts of human behavior or interaction. So to discuss and write about what you read, you need to know more than just the subject. You're going to pay attention to 3 social worlds: yours, the author's, and the one within the text. The one within the text is the most important one because that's where we start. And then how we interact, our world is the second most important one. And believe it or not, the third most important world, social world that you're going to look at is the author's. So we don't want to engage with these texts from, this is what I think the author meant. So let the author have some space, and we're not going to think everything we read in the text is the author's brain and mind and limited. They give us something to work with. So you're going to ask 5 basic questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. And then you're going to culminate that into, what do I know about the social worlds? Mine, the author's, and the one that's created in the text. And so the next thing you see here is just an outline of how you might do this linearly, but you may also do this as like a mapping concept where you just write freely information and then, do bubbles or something. But I've presented it in a linear context, not the most thrilling. But as you see here, if we're looking at the first chapter, there is who. So who's in this chapter? Who's in the text? And do I have any who questions? What is happening in the text? And do I have any what questions? And that's you'll go on and so on. And when you get to the end of the first section, you'll look at your notes and say, all right, based on these questions, what do I know about what's happening in this text? What are some things I could possibly discuss? And then you'll move on, next chapter, and then so on, or section. And you will want to do this process for as many sections as you like. When you complete this outline, you should review your notes, reflect on them, and on what you can say and possibly think, or how this reading is affecting what you should be learning. And then the final part is you want to look at the social worlds. So what do I know about the social world created in that text? What do I know about the horror created in, or the dark fantasy created in Lovecraft's text or in Lavelle's text? What's going on? And then, well, what do I know about my world? How do I know this? And when did I find out what I know about my world and how it intersects with the text at hand? So to see an example of this, let's look at my short example of Lavelle's chapter 1. So the text, who, his father, the protagonist, that's the most important person, I'm sorry. The protagonist is Charles Thomas Tester and his dad, Otis. And a question I had, because there's another character here, there's Ma'at, and I just wonder, well, how important is she? I don't know. It's the beginning of the book. I don't know. But she seems kind of creepy, and she might pop up again. What's going on? My notes were, I get to see how he makes his money running errands. It's not a legal job. It's not an illegal job. It's just weird in between space, and I don't really know what's up with that. So that's my question. It's like, I'm not sure. And it's not vital that you have questions from yourself or even comments for yourself for each of these. This is wiggle room to write down and engage with the text. So as I go through and I get to the end of the first chapter, what do I know? I know that Tommy actually is his nickname. His street name, Tommy uses being a musician as a cover for his errands or side hustles that he runs. I know he's 20 and he takes care of his father. He also lives in a segregated world. What might I discuss about the book at this point? Well, that book he delivered to Ma'at, that was very curious. I'm interested in the setting and how it's broken up by people by race and immigrant status. And then I would have more stuff, right, about this text. And when you're done with the whole thing, that is when you would come back and say, okay, what do I know? And what do I know specifically? What could I discuss about how this text relates to what I should be learning in class? And then I also pulled out from the early readings of Foster, the introduction, and then the one story section. In the introduction, Foster talks about the importance of memory, symbol, and patterns. And then in the one story section, he tells us there is only one story. And in that story, I related from the other content in that section, he talks about symbolism. So that story is a symbol, that one story is a symbol for all other stories. And then he also talks about this thing called intertextuality. And I've paired that up with content from the introduction about memory. So how does one thing relate to another? So in this idea of one story being all stories. And he also talks about this idea called an archetype, which is a specific type of character or pattern. And so I matched that up with pattern. And he also talks about myth. So these are some of the key concepts from Foster that you should be considering throughout the course of the semester, even though the rest of the book is broken down into these nice bite-sized pieces that you can apply. These are the larger ideas about reading fiction from Foster. And so that is my introduction for how you might use this, adapt this scratch outline and these questions to help build information that you can go back to and think about what you want to talk about, possible topics and subjects.